Have you ever bought something you couldn't afford, just so others wouldn't think less of you? Maybe you upgraded your phone before the old one broke. Maybe you paid for an expensive dinner you couldn't really cover, just to avoid looking out of place. Or maybe you've been quietly drowning in debt for years, but your social media tells a completely different story. If any of that sounds familiar, this story is for you. Because there was once a man who had everything people admired and nothing that actually mattered. And it took losing everything to finally understand the difference. Stay with me until the end. What he learned might be the most important thing you hear this year. In a busy city that never seemed to slow down, there lived a 31-year-old man named Nathan. To anyone looking in from the outside, Nathan's life looked extraordinary. He drove a sleek silver sedan, the kind people turned to look at in traffic. He wore tailored shirts to the office. On weekends, he dined at restaurants where the menu had no prices on the customer's side. His social media was a carefully curated highlight reel of rooftop bars, weekend trips, and a lifestyle that screamed success. His co-workers admired him. His old schoolmates followed his posts with quiet envy. Acquaintances at parties would nod and say, "That Nathan, he's really doing well for himself." And Nathan loved it. But there was something Nathan never showed anyone. Every month, 3 days before payday, his bank account sat at near zero. His credit cards, all 4 of them, were carrying balances he hadn't fully paid off in over 2 years. The car was leased, not owned. The apartment was the smallest unit in the building. The designer watch on his wrist had been bought on an installment plan he was still paying off. Nathan wasn't rich. Nathan was performing richness. Every morning before he left for work, he would stand in front of the mirror and rehearse the version of himself the world expected to see. Confident, polished, successful. But alone at night, staring at his phone with his banking app open, a cold, familiar dread would settle in his chest. His younger sister, Clara, had quietly noticed. She called him one Sunday evening, her voice careful but concerned. "Nathan, are you doing okay? I mean, actually okay?" "Of course," he said, laughing it off. "Why wouldn't I be? Because you look tired, not just physically, like something is weighing on you." "I'm fine, just busy, you know how it is." He hung up and stared at the ceiling. He wasn't fine. He hadn't been fine in a long time. But admitting that felt like the one thing he simply could not do. The truth Nathan buried deepest was this: he didn't even enjoy most of what he spent money on. The restaurants were stressful because he'd be calculating the bill in his head the entire meal. The weekend trips left him anxious for weeks after. The clothes felt heavy, not proud heavy, burden heavy. He was working harder than anyone he knew, and falling further behind every month, but stopping, scaling back, being seen as someone who couldn't keep up. That terrified him more than the debt itself. And so, he kept going, until the day the whole structure came apart. It happened on a Tuesday in early autumn. Nathan arrived at the office to find his access badge no longer worked. He assumed it was a system error. He called his manager. His manager asked him to come upstairs. In a glass-walled meeting room, with the city spread out behind the window, 2 people from Human Resources explained in measured tones that Nathan's position was being eliminated. The company was restructuring. It wasn't about his performance. There was a severance package. They were very sorry. He nodded. He thanked them. He carried his cardboard box to the elevator. That night, Nathan sat at his kitchen table and did something he had avoided for nearly 3 years. He wrote down every number, what he owed on the credit cards, what he owed on the car plan, what his monthly expenses cost, what the severance would cover. He sat with those numbers for a long time. The severance would last him, at his current spending level, less than 6 weeks. 6 weeks. He pushed the paper away and sat in the silence of his apartment, the apartment he was behind 2 months on. He looked around at everything he had accumulated, the framed prints, the expensive coffee machine, the row of shirts in the wardrobe. All of it had been bought to impress people who weren't here right now, and none of it could help him. The call came 3 weeks later. The leasing company. He had missed a payment. They needed him to return the vehicle. He drove the car to their lot, handed over the keys, and then took a bus home for the first time in 4 years. On that bus, surrounded by strangers, Nathan pressed his forehead against the cool glass window and felt something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Shame. Real, bone-deep shame. Not shame at being seen on a bus. Shame at how long he had lied to everyone, and most of all, to himself. That weekend, he drove, borrowed his sister's car, 2 hours to the countryside where his Uncle Harold lived. He hadn't visited in years. He had been too busy, he always told himself. Or perhaps too proud. Harold was his mother's older brother. He had worked as a civil engineer for most of his life, retiring early and quietly. He lived in a small house with a large garden. He drove a 12-year-old truck that ran perfectly. He wore the same 3 or 4 sets of clothes on rotation. He had no social media, and yet Nathan had always known, without ever saying it, that Harold was the most financially secure person he had ever met. He just hadn't wanted to look too closely at why. Harold opened the door before Nathan even knocked, as if he had been expecting him. They sat on the porch with cups of tea as the afternoon light stretched long across the yard. Nathan talked. He talked more honestly than he had talked to anyone in years. About the debt, about the car, about the job, about the years of performing a life he couldn't actually afford. Harold listened without interrupting. When Nathan finished, Harold was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to the edge of the yard, where 2 trees grew side by side. One was tall and full, its branches wide and dramatic, its leaves catching the eye. The other was shorter, less impressive looking, its trunk thick and its canopy modest. "A storm came through here last spring," Harold said. "You see that tall one? 3 of its largest branches came down. One nearly hit the house." He pointed to the shorter tree. "This one? Not a single branch. I've had it for over 20 years. Its roots go down further than any tree in this yard." He turned to look at Nathan. "Nathan, that tall tree spends its energy on what you can see. Height, spread, impressive from a distance. But when the storm came, the weight of all those branches worked against it. The roots couldn't hold." He sat back down. "That's exactly what you've been building. A life designed to be impressive from the outside. Tall branches, the car, the dinners, the image. But underneath, no roots, no savings, no foundation. And when the storm came, and it always comes, there was nothing holding it up." Nathan stared at the 2 trees. "But people don't admire the shorter tree," he said quietly. "No," Harold agreed. "They don't. Not at first, not from a distance. But the people who matter, the people who stay through the storm, they notice whose tree is still standing." Harold went inside and came back with a small notebook. He opened it to a page near the front. "I've kept this since I was 26, he said. "Every month, I write down 3 things. what I earned, what I spent, and what I kept. Not invested yet, just kept. The number I kept had to be at least 1/5 of what I earned. That was the rule. Non-negotiable. Nathan looked at the columns. The numbers were modest for much of the early pages. Harold hadn't earned an extraordinary salary, but the kept column never went to zero. And as the years moved forward in the notebook, the numbers grew, steadily, quietly, without drama. "You made it look so simple," Nathan said. "It is simple," Harold said. "It's just not easy. Not when the world is constantly telling you to perform, to show, to keep up." He closed the notebook. Most people spend their whole lives keeping up with people who are also just keeping up. Nobody is actually ahead. They're all just running the same race toward the same exhaustion. Harold looked at his nephew steadily. "You've lost the car, the job, some of the image. That's painful. But you haven't lost the most important thing." "What's that?" "Time. You're 31. You caught this early. A lot of people don't catch it until their 50s, when there's almost nothing left to rebuild with." He put his hand on Nathan's shoulder. "The question is what you do next. You can go back to the same game, find another job, rebuild the image, pretend this never happened. Or you can choose something different, slower, less impressive looking, but real." Nathan was quiet for a long time. "I don't even know who I am without the image," he finally said. "That," Harold said gently, "is exactly the right place to start." Nathan didn't make a dramatic overnight change. That wasn't the kind of story this was. He moved to a smaller apartment, one he could actually afford on a more modest income. He took a job that paid less than his previous one, but offered stability and left him with room to breathe. His co-workers had plain offices and brought lunch from home. Nobody wore designer watches, and for the first time in years, Nathan didn't feel the constant low-level anxiety of pretending. He deleted his social media for 3 months, not as a grand gesture, just because he needed to stop performing and start thinking. In that silence, he started Harold's system. 1/5 of every paycheck, set aside, not invested yet, just kept. The number was small at first, embarrassingly small, but it didn't go to zero. There were difficult moments. An old friend invited him to a birthday dinner at an expensive restaurant. Nathan almost said yes out of habit. Then he thought of the 2 trees. He texted back, "Can't make that one. How about coffee next week instead?" The friend said, "Sure." Some others drifted away, and Nathan found slowly that he didn't miss the ones who drifted. By the end of the first year, he had paid off the smallest credit card completely. He celebrated by calling his sister and telling her the truth, everything, for the first time. She didn't say, "I told you so." She said, "I'm proud of you." That felt more real than any compliment he had received at a rooftop bar. By the end of the second year, the credit cards were gone. His savings account had a number in it that was, for the first time in his adult life, not zero. He went back to visit Harold. Harold made tea. They sat on the same porch. The 2 trees were still there, the tall one a little shorter now after its branches, and the modest one unchanged. "I understand the notebook now," Nathan said. Harold smiled. "You don't just understand it. You started one." "I did." Nathan pulled it out of his pocket. The numbers were still modest, but they were honest, and they were growing. "How does it feel?" Harold asked. Nathan thought for a moment, like I can finally breathe. "My friend, Nathan's story isn't just about money. It's about something more fundamental. The difference between a life that looks good and a life that actually is good. We live in a world that makes keeping up appearances feel like survival. Social media rewards the highlight reel. Advertising tells you that your current life is not enough. The people around you are performing too, and you're performing for each other, all of you running a race that has no finish line. Here is what Nathan learned, and what Harold had always known. Real security is invisible to most people. It doesn't post on social media. It doesn't announce itself at dinner parties. It lives in a savings account that never goes to zero, in a life sized to what you actually earn, in the ability to face a storm without losing everything. The most financially peaceful people you will ever meet are often the least impressive looking ones in the room. So here is what you can do, not tomorrow, right now. Write down your real numbers, not what you wish they were, what they actually are, what you owe, what you spend, and what you keep. That number, what you keep, is your root system. If it's at zero, you have no roots, and a tree with no roots cannot survive a storm. Then choose one thing to cut. Not everything. Just one thing you are spending on for the sake of appearance rather than genuine value. One subscription, one habit, one performance, and put that money aside instead. It won't feel like much at first, but roots don't grow overnight. They grow in the quiet, underground, while the rest of the world is busy looking at branches. You don't need to impress anyone who wouldn't sit with you during your hardest week. The people worth keeping in your life will still be there when your car is ordinary, your apartment is modest, and your social media is quiet. Nathan lost his car, his image, and the job he was performing for. And in losing all of that, he found something he hadn't had since childhood. Peace. If this story reflected something you've been feeling but couldn't quite name, share it. Not for the views, because someone in your life might be quietly exhausted from keeping up appearances, and this might be the thing that gives them permission to stop. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. There are people out there who chose the harder, quieter, realer path, and their stories are worth hearing. The most important thing you build in this life will never trend on social media, but it will hold you up when the storm comes. Start building it today.